Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
This is the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. This podcast addresses strategies to enable enterprise transformers and decision makers to understand how digital tools and techniques deliver superior results in the global competitive marketplace. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every week with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors, and he continues to serve the community of PLM as an advisor and a mentor. Each week, we bring to this podcast interesting interviews and other ideas that are going to help all of you plan for and enhance your careers. And today we are joined again by Mark Pendergast. Now, often he is with us when we do the battles, where he and Craig fight it out over one side or the other. But today, I don't think this is as much of a battle as it is sort of a deep conversation about retirement, failing at retirement, which I think both of them have done, and what is the right mix as you get to that stage of your career. So Mark is a trustee for content for the Digital Enterprise Society. He is the author of the Digital Guidepost blog. And as I said, he's always Craig's challenger in these battles. And he is retired PLM deployment leader and engineering IT enterprise architect with over 41 years of experience. But currently he is back working, and he is back at work completing a PLM deployment. So failure at retirement. Hey, Mark, welcome back to the show.
Hey, it's good to be here, Tom. It's good to be more relaxed. With the battles, I always have to get psyched up and put on my game face. This time I'm looking forward to just talking about some of my experiences with retirement and unretirement and maybe re-retirement someday.
Well, I think you do have to get ready. Craig's a fierce competitor when we do these things.
Just look at him. I'm sorry, everybody listening, you can't see our faces, but man, Mark, you look retired. You do. You're laid back. You're ready for a conversation that you enjoy. That sounds like retirement. So, I love this topic because I get asked all the time, well, you retired from GM. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. I don't have to deal with those kinds of issues anymore. The big office, the big commute, all that kind of stuff. And then, well, you're still working. I said, well, yeah, I still collect some money here and there. And I work on things I want to work on. And I write some because I'm not done thinking about what it is I thought about for 40 years. Right. So this notion of failing at retirement, I just love the topic because I think retirement's misdefined, frankly, everybody. And for those of you that are considering retirement, let me help you. So the commute, the office politics, the extra stupid meetings that don't seem to make sense anymore, that could be the definition of retirement, getting rid of those, right? But wanting to leave a meaningful legacy that people can use, wanting to still use the knowledge you have and share it with anybody who's willing to listen. These are things that you'll still want to do because you don't just turn it off, right? I mean, I think the people that turn it off, and it's a really small percentage of us, they turn it off because they have some of their passion they've just ignored for too long that they want to go pursue. Yeah, travel's one of them. You can't travel. Well, we're starting to travel again, but the last couple of years you couldn't travel, right? So some of us who retired with this notion of, oh yeah, cool, I'm going to get the RV and travel. A lot of people know my background there. All of a sudden we couldn't travel. Well, now what am I going to do with my time? And I remember one gentleman who also retired from General Motors, and then he went to work for Aris. And his comment to me was, there's only so many sitcoms you can watch before you have to go do something that's mentally stimulating. So,
well, Craig, that's a really good segue into this topic. So let's jump into this whole idea of what retirement means. How did you guys fail, if you will, at retirement? So, Mark, let me start with you. Why do you think you failed at retirement? You raised your hand and said, I retire, and yet you're still working.
Yeah, I think well, and again, you have to look at failed at retirement at various levels, right? I think I didn't do the hard fail. So when I hired into GM, HR pulled us all aside and said, hey, the average survival of a GM retiree is 2 years. So that meant for every guy that made it to 90, there was a guy that died as he was walking out of the plant. And so I didn't hard fail, and I didn't financial fail. I've been a good boy. I've saved my money, and that's not the problem. But I think I was kind of forced into retirement due to some globalization. So I was kind of ready to go. It was kind of my date. I was around my date, but having been pushed out the door was different than me voluntarily going. And but I retired right into COVID. Mm-hmm. So they were starting the temporary layoffs the week after I got let go. And so I basically hid in the house for a year, talked to the cats and my wife, and once a week I'd go out for half an hour to try and find toilet paper. That was my retirement. So it wasn't pretty. And fortunately, about a year later, they called me back on contract and said, hey, Mark, all that PLM stuff you're doing? We don't really know what any of that means. Could you come back and maybe help us do that? And that's what I'm doing right now. Although it looks like that should run out around the end of the year, maybe a little bit into next year, and then I'll have to retire again. But I think the experience really gave me some insights into how to not blow it again next time.
Retirement is just a history lesson, everybody. Retirement is not something that's been around for hundreds of years, right? It was really this notion of a pension. It started in the 30s as our social programs in the United States evolved. And then coming out of World War II, there weren't enough workers. And so women were joining the workforce in droves, at least for manufacturing. And men were coming back from war, and those that could work. And so companies had to compete for people. And they said, well, I'll tell you what, work for 30 years, get your 30 points, whatever it is, and we'll pay you a pension the rest of your life. And at least during that expansion after World War II, companies were able to manage the funds. Well, then the 70s and 80s came along, and companies all of a sudden said, holy crap, these liabilities are a big problem because people aren't living to 65. They were thinking, oh, you'll retire at 55, at least this is the typical automotive company. And by 65, you will have passed on, right? Well, now people live a lot longer. The liability came a lot shorter. So companies started playing in the 80s with not offering pensions, right? And I think along the way, we've all gotten trained to manage our own IRAs and all that kind of thing. And so the definition of retirement, it's not like, in Europe, there are still many countries where you get to 55 or even 60, and you're just expected to live off the government pension, so Social Security plus a little more. And a lot of people do. They too are getting bored. There are guys our age, Mark and I's age, that I know in Europe that are doing the PLM consulting thing because they're just bored. They just need something to do. So I think retirement meant the pension starts, right? And what it is evolving into is something really different. And I think it's why I gave you my earlier definition. It's getting rid of the drudgery part and still doing the fun stuff. And if we call that retirement, maybe we should call it evolution, right? Because that's what it really is.
So Craig, let's jump into your story a little bit. Why do you think that you didn't end up just driving around in your motorhome the whole time? Why did you retire into continuing to work?
For one, I like small companies, and a couple of them reached out, and so before long, I was working with them part time. Right? I made it clear to all of these people. I've had about a dozen that have called me. The couple I still work for, I don't want to work full time. It's a couple hours a day, maybe. And so that's part of it. There was interest, and you guys know me. I love to chat on these podcasts. So I still have something to offer. Most recently, as we stopped back together at conferences, I met some new people, and actually one of them was a former Boeing person. Now she's at Northrop, and she's like, I just wondered what you were up to. Oh, by the way, I got this problem. What do you think? Right? And we're all we're all smart, capable, experienced. I mean, people like Mark, myself, we have a lot to share. I remember Mark and Mark helped me, but I think the last time we saw each other was at Purdue, face to face. I mean,
yeah.
And we had this exact discussion about, well, now that we've had these decades of experience at the big car companies and tier ones, what do we do next? Well, this is part of why we're a part of Digital Enterprise Society is we just want to help the next generation, right? We probably have somewhere in our background some insight that'll help. I'm not exactly sure how to deliver it, and so I'm kind of waiting for people to ask, but my replacement, a few people removed at General Motors, reached out the other day, kind of out of the blue. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can fill you in on that history. He had a history question. And so I think retirement doesn't mean locking the door and never talking to people. It just might mean the pension thing. And, we all have to come up with a better way to manage that anyways, because the companies aren't managing it.
So that's a great segue to my next question, because, we're all of an age where we grew up and our parents and grandparents' retirement meant they sort of sat around, the grandkids sat at their feet and stuff like that. And the world has changed. People have changed. People are much more active into their 70s and 80s and beyond. And so what do you guys think? Mark, we'll start with you. Retirement should be. How should we be viewing retirement as people who are in our 40s, 50s, 60s headed towards that direction? How should our mindset be?
Well, I think I've read a lot recently that, you used to have 3 boxes of life. You'd have growing up in education, you'd have work, and you'd have retirement. And they're saying there's a box in between working and retirement. This is kind of ramp out box. And because we're living longer, see, as Craig said, the retirement box used to be 5 to 10 years, period. Now it's 30 to 40 years. So they're saying there's actually another box in there that's kind of this wind down, I'm done having to pay the bills, get the kids out the door, all that stuff, but I still have stuff, value to offer. So for me, 40 years of sitting on the beach or playing golf, I'm just not there. I'm too driven. I'm too passionate about this stuff. As you can tell when we get in our battles.
Oh, Mark, you don't need to worry about 40 years on the beach. The beach won't be here that long.
Well, just move upstream. But
well, whatever.
But no, I'm Don Quixote. I mean, I'm always looking for a windmill to tilt at. Huh? My bosses that really knew me, they'd say, Mark, I think this is impossible. Can you do it? And it was like, oh, you're like waving a red flag in front of a bull, right? I mean, I just dig in and figure it out. But I think, Tom, you hit on a key point here. Grandkids. I don't have any right now. So a lot of people, that's their legacy. That's who they're passing that stuff on to. But for some of us who don't have that, then we're saying, okay, well, where do I pass that on? And I think I'm going to have some meaningful directed activity. I'm a problem solver at heart, a solution architect. I want to find a problem and solve it. And, I can only solve so many for my wife before she threatens to kick me out of the house. So, and I think we also talked about, 70 is the new 60 or maybe the new 50. Mm-hmm. And although my stamina isn't quite what it was, my brain is everything it ever was. Mm-hmm. And I think in the past, you look back less than a century ago, we'd all be dead.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
you only live to 45. So when
speak for yourself.
Tom's a young guy. That's why he can say that. But
yeah, but no, back in when Social Security was invented, it was a game because it was offered at 65. You died at 45. And if you happen to be one of those Methuselah types that lived to 65 and used up all your savings, well, okay, we'll put you on the dole.
Right.
So I think retirement has to be meaningful to you. And as Craig said, you kind of cherry pick. These are the parts of work that I liked. These are the parts of my vacation that I liked. And it's kind of finding that way to how do you merge it together and come up with this new thing that's pretty recent. People didn't think about this 30 years ago.
Right.
They just died. Now you got to kind of reinvent yourself.
So, Craig, what do you think retirement should look like?
Well, I mostly want to make sure I give back, right? And that could be to grandkids. I do have grandkids, so Mark and I are different in this regard. And that, frankly, that does drive part of my point about I don't want to work full time, right? Because there's now 4 of them, and 2 of them are into grade school, and the whole education of our next generation is something we need to focus on as a society, by the way. So I'll spend some time doing that. So that's part of what it means is I can make time for them. Having grown up in a farming community, it was pretty common for the extended family to be helping each other all the time, right? By extended, I mean, over the generations. And so that's part of what retirement means to me is that I'm able to do that, right? In my working phase, I was able to save enough that I don't have to worry about that as we go into this. Now, it's great to talk about this like 2020 hindsight. We have all this advice, but frankly, the pandemic threw me for a loop. Just the isolation. And Mark, I can't even imagine your situation where you leave the workplace and then you get the pandemic like the next month. I had a year in between the two, right? But I feel like I've been on pause. So some of these questions you're asking, Tom, I'm re-examining them because the conditions, we're engineers, we're problem solvers, right? The conditions of the problem really changed 2.5 years ago. Things I was planning to do that in 2020 never happened, right? And I like to travel. I like to travel around the world. I finally got off the U.S. continent back here in July, but that's 2.5 years late. I joked with the people I was visiting. I said, I'm only 2.5 years late, but you can thank the pandemic. But so the aspects of things I want to do in retirement are just now restarting is just the point I want to make. So ask me again in 2 years and we'll see what I'm really doing with retirement. I do want to spend time with the grandkids, that I know for sure. So that'll happen. And as travel, I mean, we're traveling a lot more. We were talking about it before we started the recording. And we're trying to do that, travel, I don't know, at least a long weekend, maybe a week, a month, which is what I thought I would do in retirement, right? Have that flexibility. So we're starting to pursue that, even though we're all still dealing with waves of the pandemic. I mean, that's just the way it is.
So why do you guys think, Craig, we'll start with you this time. Why do you think retirement is so hard for some people?
Well, I think like I said at the beginning, it's misdefined. And I think we need to define it, right? Retirement from the factory job, the job you physically can't do anymore. Well, that makes sense, right? Because as we get older, we don't have that same dexterity. But retirement from the intellectual jobs, the white collar jobs, I think it's a huge misnomer. If it means reap the benefit of 30 years of labor at a particular company, which is what it basically meant for me, yes, I've retired and moved on. But there's got to be a better word than retirement. It's like moving on to the next job. By the way, I don't really want to be a huckster either, or always looking for the next gig, right? Which a lot of people do that and make a lot of money doing that. So I think retirement also means you're not forced to find a way to make a living, right? If you have other misfortune and you end up needing to work to make your bills, well, that's a whole nother thing, and that's not retirement. These layoffs that companies go through as they resize and restructure and reglobalize, they call it retirement partly because we can still get benefits, right? But it's not really retirement, right? Because you can't stop working. So I think retirement's misidentified. And so we talk about it like failure. We should really talk about this phase. And I think I read one of the books Mark might be referring to, this other phase where you reemerge or you define something different. The best phrase I have is give back, right? I mean, I was able to be successful, and now I want to give back. I'm not going to waste my time giving it to people that don't want to listen. So grandkids listen. Some people in the PLM world reach out.
Till they're teenagers, then they don't listen. So Mark, why do you think it's so hard for people?
Well, I know it's very hard for me because I was a workaholic. I mean, work was a huge part of my life. I look forward to going in every morning. I was blessed that I had a job that I really enjoyed doing most of the years that I was going. And so it's like a whole chunk of your life just goes away. And unless you've prepared and got something, to fill that gap, you're missing the climb, you're missing the challenges, you miss all these interesting people and topics. That's why I love the battles, is because this is what I used to do at work. Every battle we do is something that people have to decide every day at work. And so, I used to do that all the time, and it was fun. And it's kind of also like moving, when you moved from school to work, and you had no idea what you were getting into. And I think moving into the retirement, or whatever we're going to call this new phase, is the same way. You have no idea how it's going to go. In fact, I almost think it's akin to dating. I mean, you're trying to find that partner that used to be work that's now going to be part of your life for the next 20 years, and you don't know where to look. And sometimes it falls in your lap. Yeah.
It's the various plagues we're dealing with, from weather to viruses to wildlife. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, there are challenges out there. We just got to choose which ones we want to work on, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what I said. It's like dating. I think, like dating, you just got to keep at it, and you need to not get discouraged, and you need to, look for what it is that you really want and learn from experience. You try this and it doesn't quite work out, and you maybe try something different. But you need to keep looking. And I think that's the key. Is it's very hard, especially for those of us, like you said, that are knowledge workers. That knowledge doesn't go away. That thought process doesn't go away yet. And we've grown attached to it. I mean, we've been rewarded because we can do this stuff. And now all of a sudden, nobody cares that we can do it. Or we haven't found the person yet who cares.
You haven't found them, right? That's exactly right, Mark. There are people that will benefit. And when they find you, then all of a sudden they're trying to make a relationship with you that satisfies both parties, right? And realizing that the last thing you want is another job inside of a cog inside of a big machine called a big corporation. At least for me, obviously, I don't want that. But yeah, let's put Tom on the spot for a second. So, Tom, what are your retirement plans? Let's see how he answers.
Well, so it's interesting, right? I have the good fortune, both from like a health check, but also from a life check. I have 3 older brothers who were 10, 12, and 14 when I was born. So my physician, and same parents. My parents were just older. I was what my dad would have called a surprise, and then he would have told you that's an accident that worked out okay because he liked me. But because I have 3, male siblings who are 10 to 15 years older than I am, I get to watch every stage of life that they go through.
That's good.
And
you get to learn.
So I do. And the 3 of them are very different. So personality wise and everything else. So the oldest has retired, and he likes to sit in his hammock. He likes to go golfing or on bike rides and walks and tell you about the tomatoes that he's growing. And he's a super smart guy, but he relishes in his retirement. The second one, he's a saxophone repairman. In fact, he's New York City's premier saxophone repairman, and he's an artist. He loves to solder and get the horns playing right and fix a dent if somebody bumped their horn. So for him, work was his art. And so there's no time or reason. As long as his dexterity keeps up and his eyesight keeps up, he loves doing it. And both of them, one is 70, one is 68 or 9, and they live that age very different. The next one is kind of torn. He doesn't want to just, grow tomatoes, but he doesn't want to work full time. So he owns his own business, and his son works with him. So he's able to work when he chooses and take long weekends and travel with his wife. And he now gets to make the choices, because he can financially do it, to work when he wants to work. So I've seen sort of all 3 of those. I probably match up more with my brother, who is the saxophone repairman, in the fact that I have always self-identified, probably a little too much if I talk to a therapist maybe, with who I am as my job. I like what I do. I like hosting this podcast and the 2 others that I host. I like speaking at conferences, and I took a job. I'm the CEO now at the Austin Technology Council, working with the growing tech companies here in Austin, and it's fun to be part of that and to meet all these new people, because I'd been out of the Austin scene for many years, traveling and speaking. So the combination of doing a lot of different things, right? I still speak. I host several podcasts, and I have this job, which is a full-time job, but the combination of lots of little ways of stitching my income together, I don't think I ever have to stop doing that. And I'm a big believer in mentorship. And our society, you hear the word thrown around a lot, but I don't think as a society we look to when we're in our 20s or 30s, hey, that person's in his 50s, 60s, 70s. I should go sit at their feet and learn their knowledge. Other cultures do that. But
yeah, maybe not anymore. I did when I was in my 20s.
Yeah, me too.
Sometimes I put those guys on too big a pedestal, and I learned that later in career. But it just occurred to me this phase that Mark talked about, this new phase. It's called savor, and if you like variety, then we savor the variety of the different things we can do.
And you mean savor like savor the experience, not save more money because you still have some income coming in.
No, yeah. That's a good point. SAVOR. Because that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm savoring, and when I find one that's a bitter taste and I don't like it, I drop it and move on to the next thing, right?
Well, and for me, I started it earlier than you guys and many other people. I started kind of when I had started my own business when I was in my 40s. I stitched little pieces together and only do work that I like to do. So this middle phase for me probably started 7 or 8 years ago and will probably continue until I'm 70, where I'll always have my hand in a couple of different pies because I like doing that. But my point was, I also look at giving back. I like to mentor people who come to me for advice. And maybe someday I'll start a coaching business out of it, for people, going through this phase of their life. So I don't think I ever stop working until I physically can't do it.
So Mark, what do you think? You think you're looking for savoring events?
Yeah, that's a neat way of looking at it. I'm thinking smorgasbord here, right? You go up and you look at the stuff and you say, that one looks nice. I'll take a little bit of that, a little bit of this. And
it's like a charcuterie board for your later career.
Yeah. Well, and I think really, Craig and I didn't do that. We were in big companies.
That's right.
We were a cog in the machine. And if you were told to do something crappy, you had to do it. And if you got to do something fun, you savored it. But you were in the slog. Yeah. And it was good slog on many days, but it was a slog. And now we don't have to slog. If we want, we can sleep in. If we want, we can go take on the next challenge. And we've got that flexibility, like I said, at the smorgasbord. You just kind of go, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Oop, that doesn't look very good. I'm not going to try that one. So, and again, like the dating analogy, then you just got to figure out which ones that you want to try.
So as we wrap this up, if somebody's listening and maybe they're on the horizon where they can see retirement planning coming, maybe they're not 25, maybe they're 55. What advice do you have for somebody at that sort of pre-stage to set themselves up so they don't fail, whatever fail means, for their retirement? What's your last piece of advice for everybody as we land this plane?
Okay, well, I guess I'll take that one. Well, as I mentioned when we first started, I guess this will come round trip. Work on your health. Don't die. If you got bad habits, if you're working too much, start to taper off. Stay healthy. If you're financially not where you need to be, focus on that. Get that right, because that is complete detriment to the smorgasbord idea. Because if you've got to make the money, then you don't get to get the choice, and you lose savor, and you got to keep being the cog in the machine. And then I think lastly is kind of get halfway there. Try some stuff. Make your vacation like a pre-retirement, and don't just go out and sit on the beach, but say, I can do anything I want this week. What would I do? And even if you can't go work for a volunteer organization, go talk to them. Find out what they do and start building those connections, that bridge to that next box of your life.
Craig, your last advice?
Well, the only other thing I would add to that, I agreed with what Mark said. So this is not a battle, obviously, but to those of you that might not have been in the market as much and have been worried about what happened to the investments over the past 3 years. The last 3 years have been weird. I'll just accept that. But there have been other weird periods in investing, whether it's real estate or commodities or stock market. And my advice to you would all be just take a deep breath, it actually will be fine. And as long as your horizon isn't 2 or 3 years, but more like 5 to 10 years, there will be another explosion of value. And so if you got anything at all invested in markets or other kinds of materials, you're going to be fine. The next couple years are going to be screwy, crazy. But today there's the annual Jackson Hole thing that the Fed does. And, they're going to say something about interest rates and it'll feel terrible. But in truth, 2 years from now, we won't remember. And that's the amazing thing about the American economy. It'll just keep coming back. And so you can count on it. And that's what I think retirees wonder is, well, can I really count on it? Yep, you can. Just be patient with it.
Nice. Well, I think this was an important conversation. Mark, thanks for joining Craig and I here. Craig, it's always a pleasure to be with you on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. And
likewise, Mark.
And for thank you. And for everybody who tuned in and listened to our show, please, you can learn more of what you heard today and on all the other podcasts at digitalenterprisesociety.org. We encourage you to leave comments in the show notes or leave a review on your favorite podcast app, wherever you get your podcast joy. Leave us one of those reviews about what you like about the show. And make sure that you join us again for our next discussion about organizational transformation through the use of digital tools and techniques. Be here every single week for more thoughts, ideas, and actionable information to help you navigate your career.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.